What if a single woman could defy an empire, ignite cultural revolutions, and leave a legacy that still echoes today, all while shrouded in scandal and mystery? Enter the world of Nancy Cunard, the audacious heiress who traded gilded privilege for a life of bold rebellion in the heart of the Jazz Age. From the shadowy salons of Edwardian high society to the vibrant chaos of 1920s Paris, she became a magnetic force, captivating artists and thinkers, while challenging the very foundations of race, class, and power. But what dark secrets propelled her from muse to militant activist, sparking global outrage and personal ruin? This gripping biography peels back the layers of her enigmatic journey, revealing the passions, betrayals, and unyielding spirit that made her an icon of defiance. Why did the world both adore and fear her? What hidden cost did her fearless pursuits exact? Tune in to uncover the untold truths of a life that shattered conventions and inspired change. Perfect for lovers of riveting history and forgotten trailblazers. Don't miss this dive into a story that proves one rebel can reshape the world. Subscribe now for more tales of extraordinary lives. Nancy Cunard entered the world at a time of profound transformation in the shimmering realm of Edwardian England, where the ancient aristocracy held tightly to their age-old customs, while the unyielding forces of modernity raged just beyond their ornate entrances. Born on March 10th, 1896, she arrived as the British Empire extended its reach across the planet, linking distant lands through immense wealth, like that generated by the Cunard shipping line, established by her great-grandfather, Samuel Cunard, in 1840. Envision those grand ocean liners, such as the Lusitania or the Mauretania, slicing through the vast Atlantic, transporting the upper echelons of society between continents, embodying not only advancements in technology but also the unbreakable might and opulence of empire. These vessels epitomize the height of extravagant voyages, boasting lavish accommodations, gourmet meals, and an aura of unshakable confidence that echoed the period's bold self-assurance. However, within the expansive, resonant corridors of the majestic estate at Neville Holt in Leicestershire, the young Nancy's existence seemed far from broad or assured. Her father, Sir Bach Cunard, a titled baronet and successor to the maritime dynasty, found greater comfort on the polo grounds, galloping over perfectly trimmed grass astride his steed, or in rural pursuits like fox hunting, chasing fleeting quarry alongside baying dogs, rather than connecting with his kin. He embodied action in the realm of sports, remaining aloof and uninvolved, delegating any emotional responsibilities or the absence of them to others. Her mother, Maud Alice Burke, who later transformed into the extravagant Emerald Lady Cunard, hailed from a prosperous San Francisco lineage, celebrated for her keen intelligence and her knack for captivating London's elite with sophisticated gatherings that attracted thinkers, creators, and nobles. Yet the duties of motherhood were met with clear aversion. Maud once shared with close companions her deep dislike for the concepts of birthing and nurturing children, seeing them as bothersome disruptions to her radiant social engagements. Consequently, Nancy matured in those immense chilly halls of Neville Holt, encircled by staff and tutors who handled everyday needs, as she was dispatched to esteemed boarding institutions in France and Germany for schooling. These schools focused on linguistics, decorum, and artistic pursuits, shaping privileged young ladies into refined members of high society. This was a time characterized by inflexible social hierarchies and rigid roles for women, where those of Nancy's background were prepared from infancy to wed advantageously, maybe to a nobleman possessing his own lands, organize refined afternoon gatherings, produce successors, and subtly recede into the periphery of their spouses' existences, their personal aspirations buried beneath societal norms. Yet, as Nancy maneuvered through this sphere of coming-out events and orchestrated meetings, ominous shifts hovered nearby. The Great War, known as World War I, approached, a disaster that would demolish notions of perpetual steadiness, taking countless lives and overturning established structures. Following it, the vibrant 1920s would burst forth like a vivid hallucination, offering emancipation via lively music, short-skirted fashions, and a dismissal of strict Victorian rules. Nancy, equipped with her incisive intellect, endless inquisitiveness, and an agitated essence that rebelled against restrictions, would do more than adjust to these alterations. She would shatter those outdated norms like a mighty surge battering a vessel's side, carving her unique route in a society not fully prepared for such audacity. Her formative years played out much like a storyline from a book she might have dismissed for its cliched nature, affluent externally, but deeply isolated and defined by emotional gaps that influenced her for years ahead. Arriving on that clear March morning in 1896 within an upscale London residence, Nancy stood as the sole offspring of a partnership that was mismatched and fated to fail from its inception between Sir Bach and Maud. Their matrimony, founded more upon societal suitability and mutual riches than genuine fondness, started crumbling soon, reaching a bitter conclusion in 1911 when Nancy reached 15. The dissolution was contentious, with rumors of unfaithfulness and discord spreading via elite gossip outlets. After the breakup, Nancy moved alongside her mother into the lively core of London's elite circles, where Emerald, now her mother's chosen moniker, orchestrated renowned soirees in their graceful Grosvenor Square abode. These assemblies were filled with celebrities, drawing notables from literary, musical, and political spheres. Emerald's events shone for their mental vitality, hosting figures such as composer Thomas Beecham, whom she later backed monetarily, or occasionally even monarchs stopping by for clever exchanges. Through these occasions, adolescent Nancy first encountered authors and intellectuals, igniting her enduring love for creative expressions. Yet, concealed under this alluring veneer lay a somber element seldom addressed: Nancy's exceptionally intimate connection with George Moore, a distinguished Irish author and longtime suitor of her mother, who assumed a stand-in paternal role post Sir Bach's exit. Moore, well into his 60s then, pampered Nancy in manners that muddled limits significantly. He would entertain her with accounts of his amorous exploits, proclaiming in a notable remark, "I would lay aside the wisest book to talk to the stupidest woman," indicating his casual view of liaisons. In an infrequently mentioned and profoundly disturbing occurrence from her mid-adolescence, circa 1912, Moore convinced young Nancy to disrobe before him, disguised as aesthetic admiration or fatherly care, a deed that veered into abuse and cast enduring doubts on her perceptions of reliability, closeness, and personal value. Scholars and life chroniclers, referencing Nancy's later recollections, such as G.M., Memories of George Moore from 1956, propose this event played a part in her intricate dealings with males in power, sparking an insurgent tendency that appeared prematurely. By her later teenage phase, Nancy commenced overt defiance, immersing herself in London's cutting-edge milieu. She formed friendships with rising versifiers like T.S. Eliot, whose revolutionary The Waste Land would subsequently embody the time's disenchantment, and Wyndham Lewis, the passionate vorticist artist and scribe. She likewise leaned toward the prominent collective called the Coterie, a band of noble free spirits encompassing Iris Tree, offspring of performer Herbert Beerbohm Tree, who mirrored Nancy's preference for untamed festivities and scholarly conversations. These meetings were infamous, all-day revelries, brimming with spirits, skepticism, and what Iris Tree termed unlimited promiscuity, where Nancy explored a lure beyond gender lines, enticing both renowned and unknown individuals following evenings of intense imbibing. A striking tale from this era features Nancy showing up at an upscale event clad provocatively in merely a dark formal overcoat atop a pale undergarment, shocking her mother and the gathered attendees who murmured about her bohemian indulgences. Emerald endeavored fervently to curb her, setting up appropriate pairings and diverting her from these unsuitables. Yet Nancy's oppositional disposition only grew stronger. In 1916, aged a youthful 20, during the turmoil of World War I, she wed Sidney Fairbairn in a hasty ritual that appeared more an urgent getaway than a loving bond. Fairbairn, a scarred combat veteran, Australian sportsman in cricket, and military leader Hurt at Gallipoli, saw their nuptials oddly lavish. Maud tossed silver pieces at invitees for fortune, a move that seemed more performative than sincere. They established a simple dwelling in London, trying household life, but the union deteriorated swiftly. Sidney's conventional demands conflicted with Nancy's liberated nature, resulting in ongoing disputes and sentimental separation. They parted in 1919 after a mere trio of years, completing the split in 1925. However, the conflict's cost demanded a steeper toll. Her ardent paramour, Peter Broughton Adderley, a charismatic soldier from aristocracy, with whom she enjoyed a rapid 5-day romance, packed with clandestine instants and vows of eternity, perished in combat in France mere weeks prior to the armistice on November 11, 1918. Companions and trusted ones murmured that Nancy never completely mended from that crushing strike. It was a subdued, sharp sorrow she bore like a concealed injury, propelling her subsequent roamings, her unease, and her unceasing search for purpose past the shallow. Afterward, she endured the Spanish influenza outbreak of 1919, which devastated Europe and took innumerable lives, but it bequeathed her with persistent ailments like ongoing respiratory troubles, worsened by her intense tobacco use, frequently 2 bundles daily of potent Gauloises. These initial deprivations and disloyalties molded in Nancy a toughness shaded with sorrow, preparing the ground for her evolution in the dynamic, disordered realm of after-war Paris. The decade of the 1920s carried Nancy to Paris, the pulsing center of contemporary art, where she remade herself among the unconventional throngs of Montparnasse, discarding the limitations of her British rearing like discarded attire. Reaching there in 1920, newly freed from her marriage and the conflict's marks, she dove directly into the whirling chaos of Dada and Surrealism, trends that spurn traditional creativity for nonsense, subconscious reasoning, and revolt against middle-class standards. Paris during the Jazz era drew wanderers from afar, U.S. expatriates, such as Gertrude Stein conducting discussions, or Ernest Hemingway crafting tales in bistros, and Nancy's keen wit and captivating aura attracted followers like insects to light. She leased a compact flat on the left bank, engrossing herself in the bistro scene of spots like La Rotonde or Le Dôme, where creators argued deep into the evening over potent drinks and strong brews. She emerged as an inspiration to titans of the age, Aldous Huxley, the mocking storyteller, patterned figures after her in books like Antic 1923, where she motivated the mysterious Myra Vivace, a lady of lively vigor and slippery profundity, and Point Counterpoint, 1928, depicting her as Lucy Tantamount, a persona of mental charm and sentimental intricacy. In like manner, she stirred Louis Aragon's book Blanche ou l'Oubli, 1967, albeit based on prior exchanges, showing her as a refined, absent-minded lead, and she even proposed the lyrical name for Tristan Tzara's drama Mouchoir des Nuages, Handkerchief of Clouds, 1924, a Dadaist gem of disjointed storytelling. Affections flourished in this rich soil, with Huxley for a short, fervent liaison, with Ezra Pound, the disputed bard who advanced modernism, with James Joyce, whose Ulysses she revered passionately, and even a relaxed game of tennis with Ernest Hemingway, where her rivalrous essence equaled his boldness on the playing field. She further linked with visual creators like Constantin Brancusi, the Romanian carver who fashioned a metallic likeness of her named La Jeune Fille Sophistiquée in 1932, seizing her graceful traits in non-representational style, and image makers like Man Ray, who eternalized her in bold monochrome pictures. But within this storm of invention and ardor, a concealed trial defined this changing phase. At merely 24, in 1920, she suffered a nearly deadly removal of her womb, a mishandled operation done to tackle undefined female health matters, perhaps tied to ailments or issues from her vigorous way of life. The process veered terribly awry, abandoning her in torturous suffering for weeks, teetering on death's edge in a Parisian medical facility. It made her incapable of motherhood, a reality that freed her in matters of intimacy. She subsequently bragged of pursuing a vibrant, intimate existence without dread of conception, but also ignited a strengthening reliance on spirits and conceivably other agents to dull the hurt, both bodily and sentimental. Physicians implored her to temper her routines, cautioning of enduring harm, but Nancy rebuffed their worries with a bold retort: one's body should not be felt, a declaration that concealed profound susceptibilities and an escalating tendency toward self-harm. While recuperating, her individual aesthetic developed into something genuinely legendary, mirroring her intrigue with cultures outside the West, her limbs burdened with enormous bracelets influenced by African designs, crafted from tusk, skeleton, and timber, piled from hand to upper arm, ringing tunefully with each motion, timber adornments recalling the angular shapes of Cubism, and daring non-traditional clothing that merged continental style with archaic features. What commenced as a quirky individual selection, at first ridiculed by certain as the pretensions of a pampered successor, was shortly praised as savage elegance, affecting upscale adornment makers like Boucheron, who introduced cuffs inspired by Africa at the 1931 Colonial Exhibition in Paris, validating the look in vogue communities. Image takers like Cecil Beaton and Man Ray documented her in these outfits, converting her into a breathing masterpiece. Nevertheless, in 1928, her existence turned sharply when she encountered Henry Crowder, an African-American jazz keyboardist from Georgia, in a serendipitous meeting in Venice as he played with an ensemble. Their liaison kindled not merely a deep fervor, but a tempest of controversy that would reshape her trajectory, merging private closeness with civic enlightenment in manners that astounded the globe. Toward the close of the 1920s, Nancy established the Hours Press in a charming rural dwelling in La Chapelle-Rayonville, Normandy, a daring business endeavor that displayed her as much more than a simple inspiration. She was an originator, reviser, and supporter of artistic endeavors on her own terms. Assuming control of the modest setup from U.S. reporter William Byrd in 1928, she rechristened it the Hours Press, utilizing her legacy to finance its sans worry for earnings, permitting her to venture where trade publishers hesitated. The operation concentrated on innovative verse and narrative, frequently manually produced on superior stock with refined lettering and covers, echoing Nancy's tasteful preferences. She issued bold creations, hazarding her riches on rising stars like Samuel Beckett, whose initial verse, Horoscope, 1930, triumphed in a competition she backed and initiated his path. Laura Riding, the contemporary rhymer whose puzzling lines discovered a niche there, and recognized names like Ezra Pound's A Draft of 33 Cantos, 1930, a portion of his grand The Cantos sequence. From 1928 to 1931, she put out a remarkable 24 volumes, encompassing works by Pablo Neruda, the Chilean bard whose poetic force she esteemed, and joint efforts like Henry Music, 1930. A distinctive assemblage where Henry Crowder created melodic accompaniments for verses by diverse writers, fusing jazz beats with written novelty. Nancy herself added as a versifier her unrestricted collection Parallax, 1925, garnering reviewer praise for its reflective insight, although she frequently minimized her own compositions to favor advancing others. But her bond with Crowder, enduring until 1935, evolved into her pivotal segment, a partnership that surpassed romance to spark significant individual and civic evolution. Existing publicly with a black gentleman in a period saturated with entrenched prejudice, when cross-racial bonds were forbidden, unlawful in numerous locales, and culturally volatile, elicited fierce opposition from every side. Sensational papers throughout Europe and America dramatized their liaison with sensational titles, portraying Nancy as a degraded successor and Crowder as a calculating intruder. Her mother, Emerald, responded with notorious contempt, mocking in correspondence, "Is it true that my daughter knows a Negro?" A statement that summed up the time's intolerance and prompted Emerald to sever Nancy's stipend, essentially disowning her. Unfazed, Nancy retaliated with a cutting 1931 booklet called Black Man and White Ladyship, a scorching revelation of her kin's and community's bias, reproducing private missives and outlining the monetary fallout, including how Emerald's powerful acquaintances menaced to expel Crowder. The booklet was a courageous gesture of resistance, but their connection was distant from perfect. It was turbulent, characterized by heated disputes where Nancy, in outbursts driven by liquor, would brandish her weighty bracelets as armaments, inflicting marks on Crowder that he casually termed just bracelet work to acquaintances. Despite the instability, authentic warmth existed. Unreleased letters from Crowder, subsequently discovered in sales, disclose his gentle aspect. Even when the bitter realities of life would tend to cause you to lose your vision of that which is ideal, the Nancy I love is now and can never be anything but adorable. Disowned and progressively impoverished, Nancy channeled her anger and fresh insight into advocacy, journeying to Harlem in New York to engross herself in Black heritage and assembling the pioneering Negro Anthology in 1934. This enormous 855-leaf volume was a trailblazing examination of Black Atlantic heritage, showcasing verse and writings by stars like Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, and George Padmore, beside portions on African creativity, jazz, blues, and civic concerns, like imperialism and prejudice. Nancy added her own probing accounts, including a direct narrative of the Scottsboro Boys incident, where 9 youthful Black males were wrongly charged with assault in Alabama. underscoring institutional unfairness. Devoted to the colored peoples, it was an unprecedented gathering, though subsequent reviewers observed that, despite her aims, it occasionally strengthened exoticizing cliches she intended to break down, mirroring her stance as a white external observer. The tome performed poorly in sales, additionally burdening her resources, but it cemented her dedication to ethnic equity, garnering her mortal warnings and nameless venomous correspondence that she courageously excerpted, remarking sorrowfully that some were overly vulgar to reproduce entirely. As the 1930s grew shadowed by the threatening ascent of fascism over Europe, Nancy's advocacy heightened, progressing from ethnic support to a wider battle against despotism and subjugation that would challenge her delicate well-being and steadfast determination. She initiated coverage on worldwide wrongs, commencing with Mussolini's savage assault on Ethiopia in 1935, which she denounced in passionate pieces for progressive journals, condemning it as domineering hostility toward an independent African state. Her forecasts were uncannily accurate. She alerted that such occurrences were a prelude to another world war, anticipating the rush to World War II. This directed her to the Spanish Civil War in 1936, where she voyaged to the battlefront as a reporter, integrating with Republican troops opposing Franco's authoritarians. Jeopardizing her existence among explosions and disorder, she chronicled the terrors endured by non-combatants and exiles for the Manchester Guardian, her reports depicting graphic images of broken households, parentless youths, and the personal expense of doctrinal conflict. Despite her progressively weak condition, aggravated by persistent drinking, undernourishment from her irregular dietary patterns, she frequently lived on scarcely more than brew and smokes, and the persistent consequences of her 1920 procedure, she coordinated relief initiatives relentlessly, transporting goods over frontiers and soliciting funds on Paris avenues, enduring hours in downpours with donation containers, her tone raspy from entreating pedestrians. A direct testimony from a comrade campaigner portrays her on Madrid's defenses, tears flowing freely as she assisted in wrapping injured fighters, her slim structure concealing a relentless essence that declined to yield. In 1937, she jointly penned Authors Take Sides on the Spanish War with rhymers W. H. Auden and Stephen Spender, a stimulating leaflet that surveyed more than 200 scribes across Europe with direct inquiries. Are you for or against the legal government and the people of Republican Spain? Are you for or against Franco and fascism? For it is impossible any longer to take no side. The replies were revealing. 126 endorsed the Republic, encompassing Auden, Samuel Beckett, and Rebecca West. A few like Evelyn Waugh and Edmund Blunden backed Franco, while others, including T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and H.G. Wells, chose a dubious impartiality. George Orwell's renowned response was conspicuously omitted, as he faulted the survey's slant. During World War II, Nancy immersed herself anew, shifting to London to serve as an interpreter for the French resistance, deciphering communications and supporting covert groups at substantial peril, frequently laboring to depletion that placed her in clinics. Her cherished Normandy residence, home to the Hour's Press, was plundered by Nazi invaders in 1940 who devastated her records, obliterating years of annotations, drafts, and keepsakes from the Spanish Civil War, a crushing deprivation seldom emphasized in her life stories, as it wiped out concrete proof of her reporting heritage and left her devastated, sensing as though a portion of her essence had been ravaged. After the war, with Europe devastated, Nancy roamed uneasily, her existence a chain of wandering chapters. In June 1948, she voyaged from Trinidad to Britain on the HMT Empire Windrush, a craft since iconic for transporting one of the initial major clusters of post-conflict West Indian newcomers to the UK, signaling the birth of diverse Britain. Nancy was among the scarce travelers noted merely as writer, a touching acknowledgement of her persona amid the landmark trip. By the 1950s, she had resided intermittently in France's Dordogne area, striving to reconstruct her life, but her vitality waned sharply beneath the burden of drinking, destitution from her exclusion and unsuccessful projects, and rising psychological weakness. She partnered with George Padmore on The White Man's Duty, 1942, a discourse on liberation from colonies that shaped West African self-rule drives, but individually she descended. In 1960, a grave collapse resulted in her institutionalization in a mental facility following odd actions like consuming her rail passes in a hallucinatory episode or engaging in aggressive clashes with London law enforcers, where she charged them with harassment. Freed post-care, she momentarily discovered comfort in a tardy affection with Thomas Canas Morales, a junior Spanish creator who matched her zeal for equity, but it concluded in sorrow when he departed, intensifying her solitude. In her concluding period, companions observed her drifting Paris lanes, without funds and wasted, her formerly lively gaze dimmed by hopelessness. She was discovered fallen on a walkway in March 1965, massing less than 60 pounds, hardly 26 kilograms from neglect and sickness, and passed at 69 in the Hôpital Cochin. Her remains were incinerated in England, and her remnants returned to Paris's Père Lachaise burial ground, set in container 9016, a serene closure for a lady who existed so vibrantly. In the conclusion, Nancy Cunard was not merely an insurgent. She was deeply mortal. Her existence a lavish weave crafted from strands of bliss and agony. She pursued visions with limbs laden with ringing bracelets, bequeathing a heritage of steadfast bravery, enveloped in the subdued ache of a female who ventured excessively. As we ponder her path, recall her not as perfect or unerring, but as vibrantly living, a female who instructed us that genuine transformation commences in the core's most delicate, susceptible spots. And in that lasting instruction, she murmurs to us, over the eras, venture to exist completely, even if it pains.